Okay, so here we are, actually ready for the summer of 1760, minus diplomacy. Yeah, I'm holding the same. Okay. Biggest event there. First of all, Prussia had enough money to build an army, and probably built a bigger one than the Austrians built. We're going to see Frederick's revenge. He also took Schwerin back as his second in command. We're going to see what happens with the Russians, but it looks like they're going to have a struggle to get supplies into the fight. Maybe there are cards. I know there's some that allow them to work together with the Austrians, and that may be what they have to do now. But the big event, the real kicker, is France went bankrupt. Among other things, that kills this card immediately, drops a point of monarchical will, but they also lost, because they lost a card to pay for it, the French fleet. That's kind of a nice thing for the British to know that the French don't have. So starting this summer of 1760, Daun splits his forces and sends Loudon over to besiege Prague, and goes and actually successfully takes Breslau himself. That's a huge swing in the victory points there. Get the Prussians, they're not that important, but they're now getting more in line with the British victory points, so the British might want to try to win the game at this point. But we've got the Austrians, wow, way up there. Now if Prague falls, we're talking a major swing, and you know, that's something the Russians, for example, and the French don't really want to see happen. Okay, so that's the end of the first phase in the summer. What happened? So we were already at the point where Breslau had fallen. At this point, Frederick came back down, defeated Daun, and is not quite sieging, but he's outside of Breslau. The Russians played the grain embargo again, which lowered the monarchical will and dropped Prussia down into the negatives on treasury. What the hell did the English do? Oh yeah, the English marched up here into Dusseldorf and defeated Richelieu here. And again, they're not sieging either, but they're in place. They had a supply line. It was guarded by some redcoats, but unfortunately, because during the interphase, this was the thing I forgot. Ferdinand VI of Spain died, so the French played the family compact, which brings Spain into the war as a belligerent on their side, and it removed pretty much the British support for Hanover. It also removed some French units, however, but they're just in the force pool. The British units are gone. So we'll see where that goes. The end of two phases in the summer of 60. Prussians and Austrians didn't do much. The Austrians reduced the amount of impressed Saxons. They got a 1, and thus only got one Saxon unit over. With Daun, the sieges, both Frederick's and Loudon's continued. Daun failed to undemoralize. Over to our friends in Russia, they did something. Yeah, they did some Cossack raiding. And likewise, the French actually did some Swedish raiding. Basically, it's a lack of having anything particularly useful to do at this point. Because the English played an immediate capitulation card in order to have Dusseldorf fall to them. The victory points changed hands over on the track. So we're seeing the French dropping lower, the British getting closer to the Prussian victory points. And then Ferdinand went and attacked Richelieu at Colm. Richelieu tried to withdraw, failed because he's not particularly good, and he was routed. That's a major victory. And we see the effect on national will. Richelieu decided to withdraw all the way back to near Strasbourg, and Ferdinand has not yet, but will probably start sieging Cologne. This is really ugly situation for the French. Alright, end of 3 phases in the summer. And what happened? So Prague fell. I don't remember if that was not this turn. That was last turn. I already went over that. And we see the big victory points for the coalition, and negative points showing up for the Prussians. Yeah, that may have happened this turn. Anyway, that's probably the biggest news, either way, of the last couple turns. The Prussians played political card and removed Luden. He's been replaced with Lacy, who's not allowed to move in his next phase. And Prussians continued their siege. Russians are trying to figure out a way to get through using Warsaw. If they capture Warsaw, they can use it as a supply source and try to extend further down. Maybe if they get something like Glogau, you know, they can actually extend into Prussia itself. French, not much. Well, the English started their siege of Colne, and the French played a French relief force to drop it back down to 0. And they're also moving their light troops towards Prussia, but it's kind of weird because both Austria forgot to move theirs. I'm not sure France really wants theirs there. At the very least, Richelieu rallied us. And after 4 phases. Jeez. So, I believe the Austrians attacked Friedrich and got beaten back down. Lacy's now available for operations. Friedrich succeeded in his siege of Breslau. The Russians activated and moved closer to Warsaw, but the Tsarina dead card prevented the army from doing anything about that. I actually looked at the forced march rolls to see if I could just plow through to there. They're bitter and harsh. There's a reason I haven't done them yet. They look really, really painful. I mean, to begin with, you lose 10% of your force, and you only do it on a die roll. It's just, wow. And bigger forces have less of a chance. I mean, it's all reasonable. It's just, I don't think I want to do it for something like this. I don't think it's necessary. It's better to be out of supply for a turn than to force march, which was what I wanted to really check. Over on the Franco-English front, well, the English succeeded in their siege of Colne, but they also played and succeeded at a colonial event, so they're getting further up. The French played a measly 1-point card, and the British blew their navy on it. Just a matter of hand size, really. So they prevented a colonial action by the French. The French pulled those light troops back. What happened to them? Oh yeah, they're over there in the thing. They don't want to make Prussia fall right now. They don't think that they'll win if that's the case. Right now, they are actually in the lead out of the coalition. So that seems kind of weird, but I don't know. They're not predicting that they're going to be doing well. They don't want to accelerate Prussian defeat is basically what it comes to. On the final round of summer, we have bad weather, which prevents people from moving more than 5 movement points. The Austrians tried to activate Lacey, and that was denied by a Prussian interrupt. The Prussians turned around. Friedrich came down to Glatz and met Daun in a fight. Daun actually had the die roll advantage in terms of, the modifier advantage. He was outnumbered significantly by the Prussians, but his force was basically destroyed. It's routed. It counts as a major catastrophe, whatever. We got the Monarchs' will down to 5 for Maria Theresa there, and Frederick's will has gone up a little bit. So that's the end of the summer. Go into the fall. I'm going to have new draws, but I want to finish up explaining what happened. The Russians pulled a new pile of reinforcements into play. They got just one of these one time only. No, not that one. Oh, geez, here it is. Russian reinforcements. They probably should have played that earlier with the Warsaw Plan, because it would allow Saltykov to not have to move. And it's actually a more effective and speedier leader. On to the English-French. The English moved, overrunning an imperial garrison here, into Venlo, set up a siege. The French had really nothing they could do. Okay, that's the end of 2 in the fall. What we got? We got a failed. The forgotten die roll here is what we got. I'm gonna spend on that. Okay. So, Daun has a very tiny force, which is why I wasn't going to spend on it. But Loudon went up here and he tried his coup de main, and it failed, and he lost 3 strength points because of that. So he laid down a regular siege for Pirna, and is starting that. Frederick took Glatz. The Russians, so they swung their axis across to here, but they've got a problem because of the poor supply across here. I don't know that they can get anywhere with that supply line. I had high hopes for it. I mean, they can dodge over if the Austrians set them up in supply, but I don't think they can fight their way out of Russia with that. So they're really looking at, can the fleet save their bacon? For the English, they actually did some Kleiner Krieg here in Lorraine. I think we've also seen some from the Prussians, maybe this turn. Rhineland's devastated, Bavaria's starting to be. But the big thing the British tried to do is Venlo, and the siege continues. And on the French side, they played for the colonial card, they played a big card. British had no response. They got their space, which knocks the victory points back down to where Prussia is clearly in the lead if the game ends now. And on the other side, it looks like the coalition, well, I guess the Russian French are ahead at 1 or at 0. Okay, after the Prussian turn, the Austrians, Loudon managed to go up. He managed to win his siege of Dresden, but Friedrich came slamming across. Probably should have left the strength point there. Slamming across to Pirna and defeated Loudon in a very close battle. The losses were actually 5d3 plus, and that's what the Prussians took, and 4d3 for the Austrians. And you say, wow, the Austrians took a little bit less damage. They didn't take the artillery hit, but Loudon doesn't give a morale bonus to his troops, so Frederick won and demoralized the Austrian force. It had to retreat back into the space Frederick came from, which is kind of neat. and apparently perfectly legal. Alright, after 3 in the fall, I think we stopped with Frederick last time. The Russians trying to figure out some way of dealing with this. They sent the fleet out. They got the card for that. They got defeated by the Brits, which means it's back in the force pool again. And they're down a victory point. Oh, and I forgot to spend a coalition victory point. So things don't look good for the Russians. I'm not sure how to get them in there. The Austrians didn't. They threw the card away last turn because it didn't look like the Russians were moving. Over to the British, they did some kleiner Krieg and hit Nancy. And the French played around in Pomerania with the penalty on the Prussians. They're down to -3 $. So the Austrians had a little bit more money with the limited credit card. Frederick began a siege of Pirna, and the Russians made a raid on Berlin. Now, it's kind of a low value thing, but to begin with, but it can get you a victory point, and it can cause damage to the Prussians. Well, it succeeded because there's nothing in the way. You need a card to do this, and you need to be in range, and they're finally in range. It dropped the Prussian national will, but the Prussians had the left-handed gloves card, which meant that the damage done was much less, and the gain is less. We did get a couple of points of forage points, is what they're called. Now, this is one of the problems with the game. Everything's abbreviated. Well, forage points are abbreviated as FPs. So are forward depots are FDs. It's just, there's so many different 2-letter combinations here, and there's no glossary. And it's really tough to keep them all in mind. So I was looking at FPs. It sounded like it meant SAs from the way it was worded, because FPs doesn't come up a lot usually. Anyway, whatever. Phase ended with the English finally taking Venlo, and they did some kleiner Krieg and raised the Lorraine up to a dangerously high level. The French withdrew the rest of their light infantry and played a card to get some more. Would rather have the forces at this point. So we finish up the fall, and the Austrians built some imperial units using we have a card for that. The Prussians failed in their siege. The Russians returned to supply, and oh, what the hell? The English did damage to the French pay system, which caused the French to lose some troops. And they also bought some supply points, as did the French, just to burn cards that they're probably going to have to discard otherwise. So that's the end of 1760, and put some dice down to remind myself. I've got some economic actions to take, etc. at the beginning of the turn. I don't want to do them right now. What I did want to show is where we are. Big thing is the Austrian national will is down to 2. Unless somebody's able to smash Prussia real hard, it looks like the Austrians are about to lose during this next year, which will make it the 6-year war, right? I wonder what these are. 67 and 68. Where's the rest of them? Seems to go from 62 to... Oh, that's weird. Anyway. That's the situation that we're looking at. the Austrians are probably going to fall this turn, which means for Prussia and Britain, this is a race, and they're actually tied right now. I don't know, I may have screwed up and have victory points wrong. I tried to rationalize why they're where they are, and I can't tell because cards, etc. have been played. And I don't want to look through it all, but there's a good chance that that's right. Anyway, that's what I'm playing with. Is there a possibility of pushing it to a different point? Well, sure. But so far, that hasn't been happening. And it looks pretty likely that unless Dresden gets taken, at least one of these imperial areas, or one more, is going to go down. And right there's your 2 points. So yeah, that's kind of the goal at this point, is for Prussia. Yeah, we got another one up here. Mecklenburg. For Prussia and England, they're in a race. Who can get the most points? And right now, if it were this, if the French aren't going to get reinforcements or something, it looks really promising in the English side. However, one never knows. Prussia could end up in a position where they can grab some serious points, because there are some important places like Prague that are just worth so much that will put it back into their hands again. Of course, Prussia has things to worry about, like the Russians, the Austrians, who will probably have an army again. All right.